The moment Victoria Hale's heels left the cabin floor, she knew she was going to die. The aircraft lurched violently, oxygen masks dangling like nooses as passengers screamed prayers into the howling chaos. Somewhere in the back, a maintenance contractor named Ryan Mercer clutched his daughter's photo, whispering promises he couldn't keep. Then the Pacific swallowed them whole. When Victoria opened her eyes on blood-warm sand, the impossible had happened. She'd survived. So had he. But the ocean had taken everything else. Her power, her empire, her control. Now, stranded on a remote island with a man whose name she'd never bothered to learn, the CEO who built kingdoms would have to learn the one thing her boardrooms never taught her: how to need someone. If you want to see how two strangers become each other's only hope for survival, stay with me until the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The water tasted like metal and salt and dying. Victoria Hale coughed it up in violent bursts, her body convulsing against the sand as her lungs tried to remember how breathing worked. Everything hurt. Her ribs felt cracked. Her left shoulder screamed with each movement, and somewhere in the fog of consciousness, she understood that she shouldn't be alive. The last clear memory was the reading light above her first-class seat flickering. She'd been reviewing acquisition documents for the Singapore expansion, red pen poised over a clause that would cost someone in legal their job. Then the turbulence hit, not the gentle rocking that frequent flyers ignored, but the kind that made grown men weep. The flight attendant's practiced smile had crumbled into something raw and terrified. Victoria had looked up from her papers just in time to see the cabin ceiling crack like eggshell. After that, chaos. Screaming metal. The smell of fuel. Someone's hand grabbing hers in the dark. She'd shaken it off, even then, even while falling from the sky. Victoria Hale didn't hold hands. She'd built a Fortune 500 empire by understanding that vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now she was lying face down on a beach she didn't recognize, wearing the shredded remains of a designer suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the only thing keeping her conscious was the primitive, animal need to survive. She pushed herself up slowly, her arms shaking. The beach stretched in both directions, pristine white sand meeting dense jungle vegetation. No buildings, no boats, no people. Just endless blue water and the scattered debris of Flight 247. Twisted metal, floating luggage, a life vest tangled in seaweed. And a body. Victoria's stomach clenched. About 30 feet down the beach, a man lay motionless, half in the surf, half on the sand. His shirt was torn, dark with blood or water or both. For a moment, she couldn't move. Every instinct told her to look away, to focus on herself, to prioritize her own survival like she'd done her entire life. But something made her stand. Something made her stumble toward him on legs that barely held her weight. As she got closer, recognition flickered. She'd seen him before, not in first class where she sat, but near the rear galley when she'd gone looking for sparkling water the flight attendants kept forgetting to bring. He'd been in maintenance coveralls then, waiting to use the bathroom, moving aside quickly when she approached like people always did. Young, maybe early 30s, tired eyes, the kind of face that disappeared into crowds. "Hey!" Her voice came out rough, damaged. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. She dropped to her knees beside him, and her hands hovered uselessly over his body. She'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, stared down hostile boards, fired executives without blinking, but she had no idea how to check if someone was alive. She pressed 2 fingers against his neck the way she'd seen in movies. Nothing. Then she shifted her hand, pressed harder and felt it, weak, irregular, but there. A pulse. "Don't be dead," she heard herself say. "Come on, don't be dead." She grabbed his shoulder, the one that didn't look dislocated, and pulled him further from the water. He was heavier than she expected, dead weight that made her injured shoulder scream in protest. When she finally got him clear of the surf, she collapsed beside him, breathing hard. That's when she saw it. Clutched in his right hand, somehow still gripped despite everything, was a photograph. The plastic sleeve had protected it from the worst of the water damage. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, missing her front teeth, wearing a princess crown and the biggest smile Victoria had ever seen. Something twisted in her chest. She looked back at his face and really saw him for the first time. The way his jaw was clenched, even unconscious. The white-knuckled grip on that photo. The wedding ring that left a tan line but was now missing. "You have to wake up," she said, quieter now. "She needs you to wake up." His eyes snapped open. He jerked upward, choking, coughing up seawater the same way she had. Victoria scrambled back, giving him space as he rolled onto his side and vomited onto the sand. When he finally stopped, he looked around with wild, unfocused eyes. "Emma!" he gasped. "Where's Emma? Where's my daughter?" Victoria's mouth went dry. "I don't know. I just woke up here. It's just us, I think." "No." He tried to stand, fell, tried again. "No, no, no. She was supposed to be on this flight. Her mother was bringing her. They were in coach. I saw them board. He stopped, his face draining of color as memory clearly caught up with reality. "We crashed." "Yes." "Emma." His voice cracked completely. He looked down at the photo still somehow in his hand, and something broke across his face that Victoria had to look away from. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it more than any apologies she'd given in her entire life. "But if anyone else survived, we need to be alive to find them. We need to focus." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the moment he placed her. His expression shifted. Not quite hostile, but not friendly either. "You're Victoria Hale, the CEO." She nodded once. "I fixed your coffee machine," he said flatly. 3 months ago. You walked right past me like I wasn't there." Victoria felt something sharp lodge in her throat. She didn't remember. She never remembered the maintenance staff, the cleaning crews, the invisible people who kept her world running. "I'm sorry," she said again, and this time it felt hollow. "Yeah." He turned away from her, looking out at the water like he could will his daughter back through sheer force of love. "I'm Ryan Mercer, and I need to find my little girl." The next hours passed in a blur of desperate searching. Ryan moved like a man possessed, stumbling along the beach, calling Emma's name until his voice went hoarse. Victoria followed, checking every piece of debris, every shape in the water that might be a person. They found luggage, seat cushions, someone's laptop case split open with electronics spilling out like guts. They found bodies too. 3 of them. Victoria checked each one while Ryan stood with his back turned, holding that photo like a talisman. None of them were a little girl, but none of them were alive either. By the time the sun started dipping toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances, they had to face the truth. They were alone. "We should go back," Victoria said gently. "It's getting dark. We need to—" "Don't." Ryan's voice was sharp. "Don't tell me what we need to do. You don't know anything about need. You've never needed anything in your life." It should have made her angry. Victoria Hale didn't tolerate disrespect, didn't accept criticism, didn't let anyone speak to her that way. But looking at his face, the grief, the fear, the desperate hope dying in real time, she found she couldn't argue. "You're right," she said simply. "But we still need to survive the night." Something in her tone must have reached him because he finally looked at her, really looked, and she saw him take in her torn clothes, her bleeding shoulder, the way she was holding herself carefully because of her ribs. "You're hurt," he said. "We both are." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "There's a section of fuselage up near the tree line. I saw it earlier. Has some intact seats. It's not much, but it's shelter." Victoria nodded. "Lead the way." The wreckage he'd found was grim but functional, a chunk of the main cabin about 20 feet long, tilted on its side like a broken toy. The seats were still bolted to the floor, now pointing at odd angles. Blood stained some of them. Victoria tried not to look too closely. "I'll take this side," Ryan said, claiming the end furthest from her. "You can have those seats there." It wasn't an invitation to share space. It was barely civility, but it was something. Victoria settled into one of the tilted seats, every muscle screaming in protest. Now that the adrenaline was wearing off, the pain was becoming impossible to ignore. Her shoulder was definitely dislocated, maybe torn. Her ribs were cracked at best, and she could feel a gash along her hairline she hadn't noticed before, crusted with dried blood and sand. She glanced over at Ryan. He'd curled up on his side, the photo clutched against his chest, and she could see his shoulders shaking silently. "I'm sorry about your daughter," she said into the darkness. For a long time he didn't respond. Then, She turns 7 next month. She wants a bike, pink with streamers on the handles and a basket for her stuffed rabbit. His voice was hollow. I was working overtime to afford it. That's why I was on this flight. Corporate asked for someone to do an emergency repair on their Singapore building's HVAC system. The bonus would have covered the bike and her birthday party. Victoria's throat tightened. Tell me about her. Why? Because I want to know, because she matters, because… She stopped, surprised by her own honesty. Because I've spent my whole life not asking about people's children, and I think maybe that was wrong. He was quiet again. Then, slowly, he started talking. She's smart. Too smart sometimes. Asks questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do thunderstorms come from? What happens when people die? He let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. I never know how to answer that last one. Her mother left when she was 2, just walked out one day and never came back. So it's been just us, Emma and me against the world. That must be hard, Victoria said softly. It's everything, Ryan said. She's everything. Victoria thought about her own life, the empty penthouse, the string of failed relationships, the way she'd deliberately avoided any attachment that might slow her down or distract her from building her empire. She'd always told herself it was strength. Sitting in the wreckage of a plane crash, listening to a grieving father talk about the daughter who was his whole world, she wondered if she'd been lying. We'll look again tomorrow, she said, as soon as there's light. Maybe she washed up somewhere else. Maybe… Don't, Ryan cut her off. Don't give me hope. I can't. I need to accept this. I need to figure out how to survive long enough to get home and tell her grandmother what happened. That's all I have left. But Victoria heard what he wasn't saying, the desperate, impossible hope he couldn't let himself feel. And she understood, maybe for the first time in her life, what it meant to love something more than your own survival. The night on the island was nothing like the controlled darkness of Victoria's climate-controlled penthouse. This was primal, alive with sounds she couldn't identify, rustling in the jungle, things moving in the water, insects buzzing with a volume that seemed impossible. Every noise made her flinch. Every shadow looked like a threat. She must have dozed off eventually because she woke to Ryan shaking her shoulder roughly. Something's moving out there, he whispered. Victoria's eyes snapped open. The moonlight filtering through the broken fuselage painted everything in shades of silver and black. And there, just at the edge of the tree line, something large was moving through the underbrush. What is it? She breathed. I don't know. Could be wild pigs. Could be worse. They sat frozen, barely breathing, as the shape moved closer. Victoria could make out bulk, could hear heavy breathing. Then suddenly, it stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. The creature, whatever it was, turned and crashed back into the jungle. Jesus, Ryan exhaled. We can't stay here. Not long term. This wreckage will attract animals, predators. Where else can we go? Victoria asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice and failing. I don't know, but we'll figure it out. We have to. The next morning came too fast and too bright, the sun rising over the ocean like nothing terrible had happened. Victoria woke to find Ryan already up, standing at the water's edge, staring out at the horizon. She approached carefully. Any sign of rescue planes? No. He didn't look at her. I've been thinking about what we need to do to survive. I'm listening. We need fresh water, food, real shelter, fire. He ticked items off on his fingers like he was making a grocery list, not planning for survival. And we need to stay visible. Keep some kind of signal ready in case someone comes looking. Victoria nodded slowly. It made sense. It was logical. It was also overwhelming. I don't know how to do any of that. He looked at her then, and something in his expression was almost amused. The great Victoria Hale doesn't know how to start a fire. I know how to run a multinational corporation. I can negotiate hostile takeovers and navigate international trade law. But no, I don't know how to start a fire with sticks. She met his gaze steadily. I'm assuming you do? I was an Eagle Scout, before life got complicated. He glanced back at the jungle. Water first. We can survive weeks without food, but only days without water. There has to be a stream or spring somewhere inland. And if there isn't, then we figure out how to purify ocean water. But let's hope there is. They set out together, leaving the beach behind for the dense tangle of jungle. Almost immediately, the temperature spiked. The canopy trapped heat and humidity in a way that made breathing feel like drowning. Victoria's designer suit, already ruined, became an oven. Within 20 minutes, she was drenched in sweat. "We should mark our path," Ryan said, snapping branches and arranging them to point back toward the beach. "Getting lost out here would be a death sentence." Victoria watched him work and felt utterly useless. This man, this maintenance worker she'd walked past without seeing, knew how to keep them alive. And she, with all her education and power and money, knew nothing that mattered here. "Ryan," she said, "I need you to teach me." He paused, looking back at her with raised eyebrows. "Everything you know. How to survive. I can't just follow you around like dead weight. If something happens to you..." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "If something happens to me, you die," he finished bluntly. "Yeah, okay. First lesson, watch where you step. There are probably snakes, spiders, who knows what else. Assume everything wants to kill you. Comforting. It's realistic." He pointed to a thick vine hanging from a tree. "See that? Might be useful for rope later, or might be toxic. We don't know yet, so we don't touch it." He moved forward, pushing through broad leaves that looked like they could cut skin. "Everything here is a potential resource or a potential threat. Our job is to figure out which is which before it figures us out." They hiked for over an hour, the jungle growing denser and darker. Victoria's shoulder throbbed with every movement. Her ribs sent sharp pains through her chest whenever she breathed too deeply. But she didn't complain. She'd built her career on never showing weakness, never admitting when something hurt. That particular skill, at least, translated to survival. "There," Ryan said suddenly, stopping so fast Victoria almost ran into him. "Listen." She did. And beneath the constant buzz of insects and rustle of leaves, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of running water. They found the stream 10 minutes later, a narrow ribbon of clear water tumbling over smooth rocks. Ryan knelt beside it immediately, cupping his hands and bringing water to his lips. He tasted it carefully, swirled it in his mouth, then swallowed. "It's good," he said. "Fresh, cold. This is perfect." Victoria knelt beside him and drank deeply, and nothing in her life. Not the most expensive wine, not champagne at product launches, not $1,000 bottles of water flown in from Icelandic glaciers, had ever tasted better. They drank until they couldn't hold any more, and then Ryan stood and looked around with new purpose. "We should build our shelter near here," he said. "Close enough to access water daily, far enough that we're not too exposed. Higher ground if possible, in case of flooding." "You know how to build a shelter?" Victoria asked. "I can figure it out. I've seen enough survival shows." He looked at her. "And you're going to help. Rule number 1 of survival: everyone contributes. I don't care if you've never done manual labor in your life. You're going to learn." Something in his tone sparked the old Victoria, the one who didn't take orders from anyone. "I'm not used to being told what to do." "Yeah, well, I'm not used to being stranded on an island with my boss, but here we are." His eyes were hard. "You want to survive, Ms. Hale? Then you're going to get your hands dirty, literally." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Victoria nodded once. "Okay," she said. "Show me what to do." What followed was the most physically exhausting day of Victoria's life. Ryan set her to gathering palm fronds while he used a sharp piece of metal debris from the beach to cut down young trees for support poles. Her hands, soft from years of manicures and desk work, blistered within an hour. Her injured shoulder screamed with every reach and pull, but she didn't stop. Ryan worked like a man driven by something beyond exhaustion. He barely spoke except to give instructions, his movements mechanical, efficient. Victoria realized he was using the labor to avoid thinking about Emma. Every moment spent building meant one less moment imagining his daughter's last seconds. By the time the sun started setting, they had the skeleton of a shelter, 4 corner posts driven into the ground, crossbeams lashed with vines, palm fronds starting to create a roof. It wasn't pretty, but it was theirs. "Not bad for a CEO," Ryan said, and Victoria couldn't tell if he was mocking her or not. "I've built bigger things," she replied, looking at their work, "but none that mattered quite like this." He glanced at her, surprised, then looked away quickly. "We need to get back to the beach before dark. Grab whatever supplies we can carry from the wreckage. Tomorrow we'll need to focus on food and fire. They made the trek back in silence, both too exhausted to talk. The beach looked different now, less like a miracle of survival and more like a graveyard. The bodies they'd found yesterday were starting to smell in the heat. We should bury them, Victoria said quietly. Ryan nodded. Tomorrow. Tonight we just need to get through. They gathered what they could from the debris: seat cushions for bedding, a first aid kit that had somehow stayed intact, twisted pieces of metal that might serve as tools. Ryan found a Swiss Army knife in someone's luggage, and the way his face lit up, you'd think he'd discovered gold. As they were about to head back to their new shelter, Victoria spotted something floating in the shallow water. She waded in, her ruined heels sinking into sand, and pulled it free. A carry-on bag, navy blue, partially unzipped. She opened it carefully and found clothes. A man's clothes, too big for Ryan, probably intended for someone who hadn't survived. Underneath were toiletries, a phone that was waterlogged and dead, and at the bottom, wrapped in plastic, a bottle of whiskey. "Look at this," she called to Ryan. He came over and took the bottle, turning it over in his hands. "Might be useful for disinfecting wounds. Or for drinking," Victoria said. He met her eyes, and for the first time since they'd woken up on this beach, she saw him almost smile. "Yeah," he said. "Or for that." That night, back in their new shelter, they sat on opposite sides of the space they'd built together. Ryan had gotten a small fire going using a technique with sticks and dried grass that looked like magic to Victoria. The flames cast dancing shadows across the palm frond roof. Ryan unscrewed the whiskey bottle and took a long drink. He didn't offer it to Victoria. She didn't ask. But after a moment, he slid it across the dirt floor to her. She took it and drank, the burn feeling good, feeling real. "Tell me about your company," Ryan said suddenly. "Since we're stuck here together, might as well know what kind of corporate overlord I'm camping with." Victoria studied him over the firelight. "You really want to know?" "We've got nothing but time." She took another drink and handed the bottle back. "I started with nothing. People don't know that about me. They see the empire and assume I was born into it, but my mother cleaned offices. My father drove a delivery truck. I put myself through community college, then state school, working 3 jobs the whole time. Slept 4 hours a night for 6 years. Ryan listened without interrupting. "I got an entry-level position at a tech firm. Worked my way up. Learned everything: accounting, operations, strategy. Made the right connections. Took risks that terrified me. Built Hale Industries from a startup in my apartment to what it is now." She looked at her blistered hands. "Sacrificed everything for it. Relationships, family, any kind of normal life. I told myself it was worth it. That success was enough." "Was it?" Ryan asked quietly. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know anymore." He took another drink and stared into the fire. "Emma's mother left because I wasn't successful enough. Said she didn't sign up to be poor forever, that I was wasting my potential fixing other people's broken things instead of building something of my own. She wanted me to be more like you, I guess. Someone who made something." "But you did make something," Victoria said. "You made a life with your daughter. That's more than I've ever built." Ryan looked at her, really looked, and something shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "We're quite a pair," he said. "The CEO and the maintenance guy. Stranded on an island, neither one of us with any idea how to survive. Both of us thinking the other one has it figured out." "I definitely don't have it figured out," Victoria admitted. "Yeah, well..." He lay back on his palm frond bedding, staring up at their roof. "Neither do I, but we're going to pretend we do. Because that's what survivors do. They fake it until they make it, right?" Victoria lay back too, every injury making itself known. Through the gaps in their shelter, she could see stars. More stars than she'd ever seen in her life, untouched by city lights or smog. The sky looked infinite. "Ryan," she said into the darkness. "Yeah? Thank you for not leaving me on the beach yesterday, for letting me help build this, for teaching me." He was quiet. Then, "Don't thank me yet. We might not make it." "But if we do," Victoria pressed, "it'll be because you knew what to do." "No," he said firmly. "If we make it, it'll be because we did it together. Neither one of us survives alone. That's the deal." Victoria thought about that. about deals, about survival, about the fact that for the first time in her adult life, someone was telling her that her success depended on partnership, not domination. "Okay," she said. "Together." Somewhere in the jungle, something screamed, an animal, primal and wild. Victoria tensed, but Ryan's voice came calm through the darkness. "Just a bird, probably. We're okay for tonight." But they both knew okay was relative. They had water, they had basic shelter. But they had no food, no way to signal for rescue, no idea if anyone was even looking for them. And somewhere out there in the endless Pacific, Flight 247's black box was sinking to the ocean floor, taking with it any easy answers about where they'd gone down. Victoria closed her eyes and tried not to think about the company, the meeting she was missing, the deals that would fall apart without her. Tried not to think about Ryan's daughter, washing up somewhere else, or sinking into the deep. Tried not to think about how many days or weeks or months they might be here. She thought instead about tomorrow, about learning to find food, about getting better at building, about becoming someone who could survive outside the boardroom. And she thought about the man sleeping across the shelter from her, who'd lost everything but was still teaching her how to keep living. The island had taken them both apart. Now it would see if they could put themselves back together. As sleep finally pulled her under, Victoria Hale had one last coherent thought. If she died here, would anyone actually miss her? Or had she built such a perfect empire that it would simply continue without her, cold and inefficient and utterly empty? She fell asleep before she could answer. Victoria woke to the sound of Ryan vomiting outside the shelter. She sat up too fast, her ribs punishing her immediately, and stumbled out into the gray pre-dawn light. He was on his knees near the tree line, heaving up nothing but bile. "What's wrong?" She crouched beside him, her hand hovering uncertainly over his back. "Don't know." His voice was raw. "Stomach's been cramping since I woke up. Maybe the water wasn't as clean as I thought." Fear shot through her. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "We need to boil the water from now on." "I should have known better. He retched again, his whole body convulsing. Victoria felt panic rising in her throat. If Ryan got seriously sick, she had no idea how to help him. She barely knew how to help herself. "What do you need? Tell me what to do." "The first aid kit. There might be something for nausea." He slumped back against a tree, his face pale and sweating. "And we need to get that fire going again. Boil more water. I'm going to get dehydrated fast at this rate." She moved quickly, her own pain forgotten in the urgency of keeping him alive. The first aid kit yielded a few packets of anti-nausea medication that looked older than they should be, but she gave them to Ryan anyway. He swallowed them dry, grimacing. Getting the fire restarted took longer than she expected. Ryan had made it look easy the night before, but without him guiding her, she fumbled with the kindling, arranged the sticks wrong 3 times, and nearly gave up before a thin trail of smoke finally appeared. She blew on it gently like she'd seen him do, and suddenly there were flames. "Not bad," Ryan said weakly from where he sat. "You're learning." "Don't patronize me, I'm terrified." She grabbed one of the empty water bottles they'd salvaged and headed toward the stream. "I'll be right back." "Victoria." His voice stopped her. "Be careful. Mark your path. And if you hear anything big moving around, get back here immediately." She nodded and set off into the jungle, moving faster than was probably smart. The morning light filtered through the canopy in patches, making everything look both beautiful and threatening at once. She found the stream easily enough. Their path from yesterday was still visible, and filled the bottle, her hand shaking slightly. On the way back, she heard something crash through the underbrush to her left. She froze, remembering Ryan's warning about wild pigs, or worse. The crashing continued, getting louder, and then suddenly a massive bird burst from the vegetation, some kind of wild turkey or jungle fowl, its feathers iridescent in the morning light. It stared at her. She stared back. Then it squawked and ran off, and Victoria found herself laughing, the sound slightly hysterical in the quiet jungle. "Food," she said out loud to no one. "That was food, and I just let it run away." By the time she got back to the shelter, Ryan looked worse. He'd been sick twice more, and the medication didn't seem to be helping much. Victoria boiled the water carefully, waiting for it to cool before making him drink small sips. "We need food," she said. "I saw some kind of bird out there. Can we catch it?" Ryan managed a weak smile. "Maybe. If you're faster than you look. I'm not joking. You need to eat something, build your strength back up. Victoria, I can barely keep water down. Food's not happening right now. He closed his eyes. But you should eat. There might be fruit, coconuts definitely. I saw palm trees on the beach. Just be careful. Not everything that looks edible is safe. How am I supposed to know the difference? You're not. That's the problem. He opened his eyes again, and she saw real worry there. Look, this is bad timing, but you need to know something. If I don't get better, if this gets worse, stop. Listen to me. His voice was firm despite his condition. The fever might come next. That's when it gets really dangerous. If I start talking crazy, if I can't recognize you, you need to stay away from me. Keep the fire going. Keep boiling water and wait it out. Don't try to help me if I'm delirious. I might hurt you without meaning to. Victoria felt her chest tighten. I'm not leaving you to die alone. You might have to. He looked at her steadily. And if it comes to that, you need to be ready to survive without me. Everything I've taught you, remember it. Fresh water, shelter, fire. Those 3 things keep you alive. The rest you'll figure out. Ryan, I can't. Yes, you can. You're Victoria Hale. You've survived boardrooms full of people trying to destroy you. You'll survive this too. He leaned his head back against the tree. Besides, I'm probably being dramatic. It's probably just bad water. I'll be fine by tomorrow. But he wasn't fine by tomorrow. Or the day after that. The fever came that night, just like he'd predicted. Ryan thrashed in his sleep, mumbling about Emma, about someone named Sarah who Victoria guessed was his ex-wife, about fixing things that were broken. His skin burned to the touch, and Victoria used precious fresh water to try to cool him down, wiping his face and chest with a damp cloth torn from her ruined suit jacket. She didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Every sound from the jungle made her jump, imagining predators smelling weakness, circling their inadequate shelter. The fire became her entire focus, keeping it going, feeding it carefully, using it to boil more water that Ryan couldn't keep down. On the 3rd day, she decided she had to find food, had to do something useful beyond watching Ryan deteriorate. She left him sleeping fitfully and headed to the beach, looking for those coconuts he'd mentioned. The beach felt different in full daylight without Ryan beside her. Emptier. More hostile. The bodies they'd found had been moved by the tide, and she tried not to look at them as she searched for coconuts that had fallen from the trees. She found several, brown and heavy, and carried them back to the shelter feeling stupidly proud of herself. Then she realized she had no idea how to open them. She tried smashing one against a rock. It barely dented. She tried using the sharp metal debris they'd collected. She managed to crack it slightly, but couldn't get it open. After an hour of frustration that brought her close to tears, she finally wedged it between 2 rocks and stomped on it with her heel. It split open, spraying coconut water everywhere, and Victoria actually shouted in triumph. She drank what was left inside, the sweet liquid like heaven on her parched throat, then used the metal to scrape out the white flesh inside. It was tough and difficult to chew, but it was food. She opened 2 more, getting better at it each time, and brought the meat and water back to Ryan. He was awake, staring at nothing, his lips cracked and dry. Hey, she said softly. I got coconuts. Can you try to eat something? He looked at her like he wasn't entirely sure who she was. Emma? No, it's Victoria, remember? We're on the island. You're sick, but you're going to be okay. Emma needs her breakfast. She likes pancakes. I make them shaped like animals. His voice was distant, dreamy. The rabbit's her favorite. Victoria's throat tightened. She held the coconut water to his lips. Drink this. Please. Just a little bit. He drank automatically, then turned his head away. Need to get to work. Maintenance request in the South Tower. Broken air conditioning. Ryan, you're not at work. You're here with me, on the island. He closed his eyes. So tired. Can't fix everything. Can't fix her mother leaving. Can't fix being poor. Can't fix any of it. Victoria sat back, feeling utterly helpless. This man who'd been keeping them both alive was disappearing into fever dreams, and she had no idea how to bring him back. She ate some of the coconut herself, forcing it down despite having no appetite, then settled in to wait. The waiting was the worst part. Hours stretched like days, marked only by Ryan's occasional movements and mumblings. Victoria kept the fire going, kept trying to get water into him, kept watching for any sign that he was getting better or worse. The sun crawled across the sky with agonizing slowness. That evening, as she was attempting to open another coconut, she heard footsteps outside the shelter. Her whole body went rigid. Too heavy for a bird, too deliberate for an animal. "Hello?" A woman's voice, weak and uncertain. "Is someone there?" Victoria scrambled to her feet, grabbing a sharp piece of metal like a weapon. A figure emerged from the jungle. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, her flight attendant uniform torn and stained with blood and dirt. Her right arm hung at an odd angle, clearly broken. "Oh, thank God," the woman said, her eyes filling with tears. "I thought I was the only one. I've been walking for 2 days trying to find someone, anyone." She saw Ryan lying motionless by the fire. "Is he dead?" "No, sick. Fever from bad water, I think." Victoria lowered the metal shard but didn't drop it. "I'm Victoria. That's Ryan." "Michelle." The woman swayed slightly on her feet. "I'm Michelle. I was working first class. I remember serving you wine right before—" She didn't finish the sentence. Victoria did remember, vaguely. The blonde attendant with the practiced smile who'd brought her Pinot Noir while she worked on the Singapore documents, a lifetime ago. "Sit down before you fall down," Victoria said. "When did you last eat or drink anything?" "I don't know. Yesterday, maybe? I found a stream, but I was afraid the water might be bad." Michelle sank down near the fire, cradling her broken arm. "Is there anyone else? Any other survivors?" "Not that we've found. We looked." Victoria handed her coconut water. "Drink this slowly, and tell me what happened to your arm." Michelle drank gratefully, then looked at her arm like she'd forgotten it was broken. "I woke up in a tree. Can you believe that? The impact threw me into the jungle and I landed in a tree. When I fell getting down, I heard it snap." She took another drink. "It doesn't hurt as much as it should. Is that bad?" "I don't know." Victoria glanced at Ryan, wishing desperately that he was conscious and coherent. He'd know what to do. "We have a first aid kit, but I don't know how to set a broken bone." "It's okay. As long as I don't have to be alone anymore." Michelle's voice cracked. "I thought I was going to die out there by myself. I kept hearing things in the jungle at night, things moving around, and I was so scared." "You're not alone now," Victoria said firmly. "We're going to figure this out together." She meant it, even though she had no idea how to help this injured woman while also keeping Ryan alive. But having another person here, another survivor who could talk and think and maybe help, felt like a gift she couldn't afford to question. Ryan woke up the next morning clearer than he'd been in days. The fever had broken sometime during the night, and though he looked like hell, gaunt, pale, weak as a newborn, his eyes focused on Victoria with recognition. "How long was I out?" he asked, his voice rough. 3 days. You scared me." Victoria helped him sit up slowly. "We have company. Another survivor showed up yesterday. Flight attendant named Michelle." He looked over at where Michelle was sleeping. Her broken arm splinted with sticks and secured with strips of fabric Victoria had torn from her suit. "You did that?" "I had to try. I don't know if I did it right." "You kept me alive. You kept the fire going. You got food." Ryan looked at her with something that might have been respect. "You did good, Victoria." Something warm bloomed in her chest at those words. She hadn't heard genuine praise in years, just the hollow flattery of people who wanted something from her. This felt different, real. "I had a good teacher," she said. "Yeah, well, the student's going to have to step up now. I'm useless for at least a few more days." He took the water she offered, drinking slowly. "Tell me about Michelle. What kind of shape is she in?" "Broken arm, dehydrated, exhausted, otherwise okay physically. Mentally, she's pretty shaken up. Kept talking last night about passengers she couldn't save." Ryan nodded slowly. "That's going to be tough to carry. Survivor's guilt." "You have it too," Victoria observed quietly. "About Emma." He didn't answer, just stared at the fire. After a long moment, he said, "Every parent on that plane was thinking about their kids when we went down. Every single one. I keep wondering if she was scared, if she called for me, if it was fast or if—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I can't think about it. If I let myself go there, I won't come back." Victoria understood that too well. She'd been avoiding thinking about her own company, about the shareholders who'd be circling like sharks, about her CFO Marcus, who'd probably already started positioning himself to take over. If she let herself believe she'd never get back, never reclaim what she'd built, she'd crumble. Then we focus on surviving, she said. One day at a time. That's all we can do. Michelle stirred and woke, her eyes going wide when she saw Ryan sitting up. You're awake. Thank God. I was worried you wouldn't make it. Hard to kill, Ryan said with a weak smile. Victoria tells me you've got a broken arm. How's the pain? Manageable. Your friend did a decent job with the splint. Michelle looked between them. What's our plan? Just wait here for rescue? We need to do more than wait, Ryan said. We need to make ourselves visible, a signal that can be seen from the air. He tried to stand, wavered, and Victoria grabbed his arm to steady him. You're not doing anything except resting, she said firmly. Michelle and I will handle whatever needs to be done. Just tell us how. Over the next few days, a strange routine developed. Ryan directed operations from his position near the fire, his strength slowly returning. Victoria and Michelle worked together to create a large SOS on the beach, using rocks and pieces of wreckage, making it as visible as possible from above. They gathered more coconuts, found a grove of banana trees that felt like winning the lottery, and started experimenting with catching fish in the shallows. Michelle turned out to be better at fishing than either of them expected. She'd grown up near the coast, she explained, and her father had taught her to catch dinner with her bare hands. It was mesmerizing to watch her wade into the water, moving slowly, patiently, then striking fast as lightning to grab a fish and toss it onto the beach. You're like a bear, Victoria said, impressed despite herself. I prefer to think of myself as graceful, Michelle replied, grinning. It was the first time Victoria had seen her smile, and it transformed her face. But sure, we'll go with bear.
Don passe.
That night, they cooked the fish over the fire, the first real protein they'd had since the crash. It tasted like the finest meal Victoria had ever eaten in any Michelin-starred restaurant. They sat around the fire, the three of them, and for a moment it almost felt normal, like they were camping, not stranded. Tell me something good, Michelle said suddenly. Something from before. I need to remember that there's a world out there worth getting back to. Victoria thought about her penthouse, her corner office, her parking space with her name on it. None of it felt particularly good to remember. I have a daughter, Ryan said quietly. Emma. She's 6. She laughs at dad jokes and sings off key and gives the best hugs in the world. That's good. That's worth getting back to. Michelle nodded. I was engaged. The wedding's supposed to be in 3 months. Big church ceremony, terrible DJs, all our relatives giving speeches. She smiled sadly. I complained about planning it so much. Now I'd give anything to be stressed about seating charts. They both looked at Victoria. She felt the weight of their expectation, the assumption that she too had something precious waiting for her. But when she searched her memory, all she found was emptiness dressed up as success. I don't have anyone, she admitted. No husband, no kids, no fiancé. I have a company, employees who depend on me, a board that's probably trying to figure out succession planning right now. She poked at the fire with a stick. I spent 15 years building something that could replace me in 15 days. That's not true, Ryan said. Isn't it? She looked at him. You were right when you said I walked past you like you weren't there. I walk past everyone like that. I thought it made me strong. I thought it made me successful. But sitting here, listening to you talk about your daughter, listening to Michelle talk about her wedding, I'm realizing I might have built an empire, but I forgot to build a life. The silence that followed was uncomfortable but not hostile. Michelle broke it first. My therapist always said it's never too late to change course, she offered. Not that I listened to her half the time. But maybe she was right. If we get off this island, Victoria said slowly, I'm going to do things differently. I don't know what that looks like yet, but different. When we get off this island, Ryan corrected. Not if. When. You really believe that? Michelle asked. I have to. Because the alternative is giving up, and I can't do that. Emma needs me to come home. His voice was steady, certain. So we're getting rescued. However long it takes, we keep surviving until someone finds us. But the days stretched into weeks, and no rescue came. They saw planes occasionally, distant specks too far away to notice their SOS. They kept the signal fire burning constantly, taking turns feeding it through the night. They improved their shelter, adding walls and a better roof. They learned which fruits were safe to eat through careful testing, tiny tastes, waiting to see if they got sick. They caught more fish. They stopped vomiting from bad water. They survived. But survival wasn't the same as living, and the isolation was starting to wear on all of them in different ways. Michelle had nightmares every night, waking up screaming about passengers trapped in their seats while water rushed in. Ryan grew quieter, more withdrawn, spending hours staring at Emma's photo like he could will himself back to her through sheer force of love. And Victoria found herself thinking constantly about all the years she'd wasted, all the connections she'd dismissed, all the moments she'd traded for conference calls and quarterly reports. One morning, about a month after the crash, Victoria woke to find Ryan gone. His spot by the fire was empty, the blanket they'd made from palm fronds tossed aside. Panic shot through her immediately. She shook Michelle awake. "Ryan's not here." Michelle sat up groggily. "Maybe he went to the stream." "Maybe." But something felt wrong. Victoria grabbed her makeshift weapon, a solid piece of metal she'd sharpened against rocks, and headed into the jungle. She found him at the stream, sitting on the bank with his feet in the water. He wasn't moving, just staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "Ryan?" She approached carefully. "You okay?" "Today's her birthday," he said without looking up. "Emma, she's 7 today. I'm supposed to be giving her that bike. Pink with streamers in a basket. I saved for 8 months to afford it." Victoria sat down beside him. She didn't touch him, didn't speak. Sometimes silence was all you could offer. "She's probably having the birthday without me," he continued. "Her grandmother will do something nice, a cake, presents. But I won't be there. I'm missing her birthday. I'm missing her growing up." His voice cracked. "What if I miss her whole childhood? What if we're here for years? What if rescue never comes and she grows up thinking I'm dead?" "She won't grow up thinking that," Victoria said firmly, "because we're getting off this island. You said it yourself, however long it takes. I can't do this for years, Victoria. I can't survive knowing she's out there thinking I abandoned her." "You didn't abandon her. The plane crashed. That's not your fault." "Doesn't matter whose fault it is." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were devastated. "She's 7 years old. She doesn't understand fault. She just knows her dad's not there." Victoria thought about her own childhood, about her father who worked himself to death, and her mother who cleaned other people's offices until her hands bled, about how she'd sworn she'd never struggle like they did, never be invisible like they were, about how that promise had somehow twisted into forgetting that being seen meant being connected. "Tell me about her birthday last year," she said. "What did you do?" Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he started talking. About the small party in their apartment, about Emma's friends from school who came over, about the cake he'd tried to bake that came out lopsided but Emma said was perfect anyway, about how she'd hugged him and said he was the best dad in the world, and how he'd believed her completely. Victoria listened, and as he talked, she saw him come back to himself piece by piece. The memories were painful, but they were also anchors, tethering him to the life he was fighting to return to. When he finally stopped talking, the sun was high overhead. They'd been sitting by the stream for hours. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For sitting here. For listening. For not trying to fix it." He stood, offering her his hand to help her up. "You're getting better at this whole human connection thing, you know." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "I have good teachers." They walked back to the shelter together, and for the first time since the crash, Victoria felt something that might have been hope. Not hope for rescue necessarily, but hope that even in the worst circumstances, people could still reach each other, still matter to each other, still survive together. Michelle was the one who found it, 3 days after Ryan's breakdown by the stream. She'd been exploring further along the coastline, looking for a better fishing spot, when she came running back to camp with her face flushed and her broken arm clutched against her chest. "There's something out there," she gasped, pointing back the way she'd come. "In the rocks. It looks like... I don't know what it looks like, but you need to see it." Ryan and Victoria exchanged glances, then followed her along the beach. The walk took nearly 40 minutes, the sand giving way to sharp volcanic rock that cut through the makeshift shoes they'd fashioned from plane debris. Michelle led them around a jutting cliff face, and there, wedged between two massive boulders, was a wooden structure. Not natural. Built. "It's a boat," Ryan said, moving closer. "Or what's left of one." The vessel was ancient, half-rotted, its hull split open like a broken rib cage, but it was unmistakably human-made, and that meant something Victoria's rational mind immediately latched onto. "Someone else was here," she said. "Someone survived here before us." "Or died here," Michelle added quietly. They climbed over the rocks carefully, approaching the wreckage. Ryan reached it first, running his hands over the weathered wood. "This is old, really old, years, maybe decades." "Does that mean there might be supplies?" Victoria asked. "Tools? Anything useful?" "Only one way to find out." They spent the next hour searching through the wreckage, careful not to cut themselves on the splintered wood and rusted metal. Most of what they found was useless: rotted rope, pieces of canvas so deteriorated they fell apart at the touch, barnacles coating everything. But then Ryan let out a low whistle. "Here." He pulled something from beneath a collapsed section of decking, a metal box sealed with a rusted latch. "This might be something." Getting it open took effort and careful prying with their makeshift tools, but eventually the latch gave way. Inside, wrapped in what had once been oilcloth, were items that made Victoria's heart race. A knife, real, steel, sharp despite the years, fishing hooks and line, a flint striker, and at the bottom, a journal, its pages protected by a leather cover that had somehow kept most of the moisture out. "Someone lived here," Michelle breathed. "Really lived here. Long enough to need these things." Ryan opened the journal carefully. The first page was dated, the ink faded, but legible. "June 14th, 1987, he read aloud. "My name is Thomas Chen. My fishing boat went down in a storm 3 days ago. I don't know where I am, but I'm alive. I'm going to stay alive." Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. "That's almost 40 years ago." "Keep reading," Michelle urged. Ryan flipped through the pages, reading snippets aloud. Thomas Chen had been a commercial fisherman working out of Taiwan. His boat had capsized in a typhoon, and he'd washed up on this island with nothing but the clothes on his back. The early entries were desperate, frightened, full of prayers and promises. But as the pages progressed, his tone changed. He learned to fish, to hunt, to survive. He documented everything: which fruits were safe, where fresh water could be found, how to predict storms by watching the birds. "He was here for 7 months, Ryan said, reaching the later entries. 7 months alone before—" He stopped reading. "Before what?" Victoria asked. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Before a fishing vessel spotted his signal fire. He was rescued, got home to his family." He looked up at them, and something fierce burned in his eyes. "He survived. 7 months on this island alone, and he got home." "So can we," Michelle said, but her voice shook slightly. "They took everything from the wreck, the tools, the journal, even some of the better pieces of wood that could be repurposed." As they walked back to camp, Victoria found herself thinking about Thomas Chen, about 7 months of isolation, about what it took to stay human when you were utterly alone. "At least we have each other," she said out loud. Ryan glanced at her. "Yeah, at least there's that." That night, they read more of the journal by firelight. Thomas Chen had been meticulous in his observations, and his notes became a survival manual that filled in gaps they hadn't known existed. He documented tides, weather patterns, the behavior of local wildlife. He'd drawn maps of the island, marking fresh water sources and areas to avoid. He'd even included sketches of edible plants and fish species. "This is incredible," Victoria said, poring over a page about collecting rainwater. "He's telling us exactly how to survive here." "For 7 months he did it," Ryan said quietly. "We're at 5 weeks. We're not even halfway." "But we're doing better than he was at 5 weeks, Michelle pointed out. "He was alone. We have each other, and now we have his knowledge. That has to count for something." The tools changed everything. With the real knife, they could cut bamboo properly, could clean fish efficiently, could defend themselves if needed. The fishing hooks and line meant Michelle could catch bigger fish from deeper water. The flint striker meant they could restart their fire reliably even after rain. Small things, but they added up to the difference between barely surviving and actually living. Victoria found herself reading the journal obsessively, particularly the later entries where Thomas Chen reflected on what isolation had taught him. The worst part isn't the hunger or the fear, he'd written. It's forgetting what it feels like to be part of the world. I talk to myself now just to remember how conversation works. I make up stories about the people I left behind. Imagine what they're doing, what they're saying. Without that, I think I'd lose myself completely. She understood that fear. Even with Ryan and Michelle here, even with conversation and shared work, she sometimes felt herself drifting. The person she'd been, Victoria Hale, CEO, corporate titan, felt increasingly like a character she'd once played. That woman who'd fired people without blinking, who'd crushed competitors, who'd never let anyone see weakness. That woman couldn't survive here. She'd already tried, and she would have died in the first week without Ryan. "You're thinking too loud," Ryan said, sitting down beside her. She closed the journal. "Just wondering what happens if we do get rescued, who I'll be when I go back." "You'll be yourself." "I'm not sure I know who that is anymore." She looked at him in the firelight. "The island's changing me. I used to think I had everything figured out, power, success, control. Now I can't even open a coconut without help." "You can, actually. You've gotten pretty good at it." He smiled slightly. "And maybe that's not a bad thing. The changing, I mean. Maybe we're supposed to learn something from this." "What, that material success is meaningless? That's pretty cliché." "No, that we're not supposed to do everything alone." He gestured at their camp, the improved shelter, the organized supplies, the fire burning steady. "None of this works if it's just one person." Thomas Chen survived 7 months, but he wrote about how close he came to giving up. Multiple times he almost walked into the ocean and didn't come back. We haven't had those moments because we've had each other. Victoria thought about that, about how many times in her corporate life she'd refused help, insisted on handling everything herself, seen collaboration as weakness rather than strength. "I've been doing it wrong," she said quietly. "Maybe not wrong, just incomplete." Ryan stood, stretching. "I'm going to check the signal fire. You should get some sleep." But sleep didn't come easily. Victoria lay in the shelter listening to Michelle's steady breathing and Ryan's footsteps as he tended the fire, and thought about incompleteness, about Emma, who she'd never met but felt like she knew from Ryan's stories, about Michelle's fiancé, waiting for a bride who might never come home, about her own empty penthouse that nobody would miss her in. The storm hit 2 days later, rolling in from the ocean like a wall of rage. They saw it coming, the birds fleeing inland, the sudden stillness in the air, the way the water changed from blue to steel gray. Thomas Chen's journal had warned about typhoon season, but knowing it was coming and experiencing it were entirely different things. "We need to secure everything," Ryan shouted over the rising wind. "Get all the supplies into the shelter. Tie down anything that could blow away." They worked frantically, Michelle struggling one-handed to help move their precious tools and food stores. The wind picked up fast, whipping sand into their faces, bending the palm trees at impossible angles. By the time they got everything secured and retreated into the shelter, the rain had started. Not gentle drops, but sheets of water that turned the world gray and blurred. "How long do these usually last?" Michelle yelled over the roar of wind and rain. "Thomas Chen wrote about one that lasted 3 days," Victoria shouted back. 3 days? Michelle's face went pale. "Our shelter can't handle 3 days of this." She was right. Already water was leaking through the palm frond roof, and the walls were shaking with each gust of wind. Ryan moved to the corner post, checking the lashings, reinforcing what he could with trembling hands. "It'll hold," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. The first night was terrifying. The wind howled like something alive and angry, tearing at their shelter with what felt like deliberate malice. One of the wall sections ripped away completely around midnight, and suddenly rain was pouring in sideways. They huddled together in the driest corner, using their bodies to shield the supplies, and Victoria realized with startling clarity that they might actually die here. Not from slow starvation or dehydration, but fast, torn apart by a storm that didn't care about their determination to survive. "Stay close," Ryan said, his arm around Michelle's shoulders, his other hand gripping Victoria's. "We stay together no matter what." Lightning split the sky, illuminating everything in stark white. In that flash, Victoria saw their faces, Michelle crying silently, Ryan's jaw clenched with fear, and probably her own expression showing the same terror. Then darkness again, and the sound of something large crashing in the jungle nearby. That was a tree, Ryan said. A big one. Our signal, Michelle gasped. The SOS on the beach. Forget it. It's gone. We'll rebuild. Ryan's voice was steady, even though Victoria could feel him shaking. Right now, we just survived the next hour. Then the next. That's all. The second day was worse. The storm didn't let up, and the shelter continued to deteriorate. They lost another wall section, then part of the roof. Water soaked everything, their clothes, their blankets, their carefully hoarded food supply. The fire went out and couldn't be relit. They sat in the dark, shivering despite the warm rain, and Victoria thought about Thomas Chen surviving this alone. How had he done it? How had he not simply given up? Tell me something good, Michelle said suddenly, her teeth chattering. Anything. I need to think about something other than this. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then, Emma's favorite thing is when I read to her at bedtime. She has this book about a dragon who's afraid of flying. Every night she makes me read it, even though she has it memorized. And every night, when the dragon finally flies, she cheers like it's the first time. Like she's genuinely surprised and happy that it worked out. That's sweet, Michelle said softly. Your turn, Ryan said to Victoria. She struggled to think of something. What good memories did she have? Business triumphs felt hollow here. Then something surfaced from years ago, before the empire, before the success. When I was 10, my mother took me to her office building after hours. She cleaned offices downtown, and that night she brought me with her. I thought it would be boring, but she made it fun. We pretended we were secret agents, sneaking through the empty building. She'd point at the desks and tell me stories about the people who sat there, made-up stories, funny ones. An accountant who was secretly a superhero. A lawyer who was actually 3 kids in a trench coat. Victoria smiled at the memory. I asked her once why she seemed so happy doing work that other people looked down on. She said every job was worth doing right, and there was dignity in making spaces clean and safe for people, even if they never noticed. She sounds wonderful, Michelle said. She was. She died when I was 20. Breast cancer. I was so angry at her for leaving, for not fighting harder, for... Victoria's voice caught. For not being there to see me succeed. I built everything I built partly to prove she was wrong about dignity in invisible work. That visibility, power, being seen, that was what mattered. And now? Ryan asked quietly. Now I think maybe she was right, and I was wrong. Victoria wiped rain from her face, unable to tell if it was mixed with tears. She was happy. I built an empire, and I don't think I've been happy a single day in the last decade. They sat in silence, the storm raging around them. Then Michelle spoke, her voice small. I almost didn't take this flight. I was supposed to have it off, but I switched with another attendant because I needed the overtime. My fiancé told me not to, said we could manage without the extra money. We fought about it. Last thing I said to him was that he didn't understand how expensive weddings were. She let out a broken laugh. I was mad at him for not caring enough about our wedding. Now I'd give anything to tell him I'm sorry, that the wedding doesn't matter, that I just want to see him again. You will, Ryan said firmly. Both of you will get home and tell the people you love all the things you need to say. That's a promise. You can't promise that, Michelle said. Watch me. The storm broke on the third day, the wind dying as suddenly as it had started. They emerged from what was left of their shelter into a world transformed. Trees were down everywhere, the beach littered with debris and destruction. Their careful SOS was completely obliterated, scattered across hundreds of yards of coastline. The signal fire was a muddy pit. Most of their food supply was ruined, but they were alive. Well, Ryan said, looking at the devastation, we've rebuilt before. We can do it again. I don't know if I can, Michelle said quietly. She was shaking, her broken arm clutched against her chest, her eyes hollow. I don't know if I have another rebuild in me. Victoria understood the feeling. Looking at everything they'd worked for destroyed, having to start over from nearly nothing again, was almost too much to bear. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, emotional, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. We don't have to do it all today, she said, surprising herself. We do what we can, rest when we need to, take it hour by hour like Ryan said. Listen to you, Ryan said with a tired smile. Becoming a motivational speaker. Shut up. I'm trying something new. They spent that day just recovering, finding dry ground to sleep on, wringing out what clothes they could salvage, taking inventory of what they'd lost. The knife and tools from Thomas Chen's boat had survived, protected by the metal box they'd stored them in. The journal was water damaged but still legible. They had enough supplies to start over, but only just. That night, sleeping under stars that seemed impossibly bright after the storm, Victoria made a decision. If they did get rescued, when they got rescued, she was going to stop pretending she didn't need people. She was going to rebuild her life the same way they were rebuilding this camp, with collaboration, with genuine connection, with the understanding that strength wasn't the same as invulnerability. You're thinking loud again, Ryan said from his spot nearby. Making plans, she replied, for after. Good plans? Better plans. Different plans. She rolled onto her side to look at him. Thank you. For what? For not letting me die in that first week, for teaching me, for not giving up on me even when I was useless. He was quiet for a moment. You were never useless. Unskilled, maybe, but not useless. And you learned fast. Because I had a good teacher. Because you were willing to learn. That's rarer than you think. He stared up at the stars. Most people in your position would have expected me to do everything, would have pulled rank even here. You didn't. You saw what needed to happen and you did it. Victoria thought about the woman who'd boarded Flight 247, the one who'd dismissed the maintenance worker in the hallway without a second glance. That woman was gone, stripped away by salt water and hunger and necessity. What was left felt rawer, more honest, more real. We're going to make it, she said, and this time she believed it. Yeah, Ryan agreed. We are. The next week was spent rebuilding. They used Thomas Chen's notes to create a better shelter, one designed to withstand storms. They moved their camp slightly inland, to higher ground near the freshwater stream. They expanded their food preservation techniques, learning to smoke fish using methods from the journal. They rebuilt the SOS signal, bigger and more visible than before, and slowly, day by day, they stopped being three strangers who'd survived a plane crash and started being something else. A team. A family, maybe. They knew each other's habits, fears, hopes. They knew who needed silence in the morning and who needed conversation. They knew when someone was struggling and needed support without being asked. Victoria found herself thinking less about her company and more about what came after. Michelle talked about her wedding with renewed excitement rather than stress, reimagining it as something smaller, more meaningful. Ryan still mourned Emma every day, but the grief became something he could carry rather than something that carried him. 2 months after the crash, Victoria woke before dawn and walked down to the beach alone. The sun was just starting to paint the horizon in shades of orange and pink. She stood at the water's edge, the same spot where she'd first opened her eyes and realized she'd survived, and tried to remember who she'd been then. That woman felt like a stranger now. Couldn't sleep? Ryan's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him approaching, Emma's photo in his hand as always. Just thinking. Dangerous habit. He stood beside her, looking out at the water. What about? About how much I hated you that first day. How much I resented needing your help. She smiled slightly. About how wrong I was about basically everything. You didn't hate me. You just didn't see me. There's a difference. And now? He looked at her thoughtfully. Now I think we see each other pretty clearly. All the good parts and all the broken parts. And somehow we're both still here. Victoria nodded. That was it exactly. They'd seen each other at their absolute worst, their most vulnerable, their most broken, and they hadn't looked away. They'd stayed. They'd helped. They'd rebuilt together. When we get rescued, she said carefully, I don't want to go back to pretending we're strangers. Boss and employee, CEO and maintenance guy. I want... She struggled to find the words. I want to remember this. Who we became here. We will, Ryan said simply. You don't forget the people who save your life. And Victoria? We saved each other. In the distance, so faint she almost missed it, she heard something. A mechanical sound, rhythmic and steady, getting louder. Ryan heard it too. His head snapped up, his eyes scanning the horizon. Is that... Michelle came running from the camp, her voice high with desperate hope. Is that what I think it is? The sound grew clearer, more distinct. The unmistakable whoop, whoop, whoop of helicopter rotors cutting through the morning air. The signal, Ryan gasped. Light the signal fire, now. They ran. Victoria's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the flint striker. Ryan grabbed it from her, his own hands not much steadier, and struck it again and again over the kindling they kept ready for exactly this moment. Nothing caught. The helicopter sound was getting louder, closer, but she couldn't see it yet through the morning haze. Come on, Ryan muttered desperately, striking the flint harder. A spark caught, then died. Another spark. The kindling smoked but didn't ignite. Michelle was already on the beach, waving her good arm frantically at the sky, screaming words that were lost in the rotor noise. The helicopter appeared over the tree line, white with orange markings, official rescue colors, and Victoria's heart lurched so hard it hurt. They're going right past us, she said, her voice breaking. They can't see us without the fire. Ryan struck the flint again, and this time the kindling caught. Small flames licked upward, and he fed them carefully with dry grass and twigs, building them up. The fire grew, smoke rising, but it seemed so small against the vast sky. Would it be enough? Could they see it? The helicopter continued its path along the coastline, steady and methodical, not changing course, not slowing down. No, Ryan breathed. No, please. Victoria ran to the beach, joining Michelle in waving her arms, both of them screaming themselves hoarse. The helicopter was maybe a quarter-mile away now, still moving parallel to the shore. Behind them, the signal fire was finally producing real smoke, a dark column rising into the pale morning sky. Look at us, Michelle sobbed. Please look at us. For a terrible moment, Victoria was certain they'd miss them. The helicopter would continue past, would complete its search pattern elsewhere, and they'd be left behind again. 2 months of surviving, of rebuilding, of learning to be more than they'd been, and it would all mean nothing because a pilot hadn't looked in the right direction at the right moment. Then the helicopter banked sharply left. It was turning, coming back. The nose angled toward the beach, toward them, and Victoria felt her knees go weak. They see us, she gasped. They see us. Ryan appeared beside them, his face streaked with soot and tears he wasn't bothering to hide. We're going home, he said, and his voice was full of everything they'd been through to reach this moment. The helicopter circled once, low enough that they could see faces in the windows, and then descended toward the beach. Sand whipped up in blinding clouds, forcing them to turn away and shield their faces. The skids touched down, and the engine pitch changed. Before the rotors had fully stopped spinning, the side door slid open and rescue personnel jumped out. The first person to reach them was a woman in an orange jumpsuit, her face professionally concerned but warm. How many survivors? She shouted over the dying rotor noise. 3, Ryan shouted back. Just us 3. Anyone else on the island? Any other crash sites? No, we looked. It's just us. The woman, her name tag read Carson, nodded and immediately began assessing them with quick, efficient movements. She checked Michelle's broken arm first, frowning at the makeshift splint, then moved to Ryan, noting his gauntness, the way he held himself carefully like someone who'd been sick recently. When she got to Victoria, her frown deepened. That shoulder's dislocated, she said. How long have you been walking around with it like that? 2 months, Victoria said. Give or take. Carson's eyes widened. 2 months? Jesus. Okay, we need to get you all to medical immediately. She turned and signaled to her team. Get the stretchers. We've got 1 broken arm, 1 dislocation, and all 3 show signs of malnutrition and dehydration. I can walk, Ryan protested. I'm sure you can, but you're not going to. Carson's tone left no room for argument. Standard procedure. You've been through hell. You're getting checked properly before we move you. Another rescue worker approached, younger, his face pale as he took in their condition. Sir, ma'am, he said to Ryan and Victoria, we need to notify your families. Can you give us contact information? Ryan's hand went immediately to his pocket, to where Emma's photo had lived for 2 months. My daughter, Emma Mercer. She's with her grandmother, Catherine Mercer, in Portland, Oregon. The number... He recited it from memory, digits he'd probably repeated to himself 1,000 times to keep from forgetting. The young rescue worker wrote it down quickly. We'll contact her immediately. Anyone else? No, Ryan said. Just Emma. Just my daughter. Victoria felt the weight of that. Just Emma. The entirety of Ryan's world in a 6-year-old girl who thought her father was dead. She gave them her assistant's information, then her CFO's, watching the rescue worker's expression shift slightly as he recognized her name. You're Victoria Hale, the CEO of Hale Industries? Yes. The word felt strange in her mouth, like a name she'd once answered to but no longer quite fit. Ma'am, there's been... He stopped, glancing at Carson, who shot him a sharp look. Later, Carson said firmly. Medical first, briefings after. That's protocol. They were loaded onto stretchers despite their protests, secured with straps that felt wrong after 2 months of freedom, and carried to the helicopter. As they lifted off, Victoria twisted to look back at the island through the open door. Their shelter was visible from the air, small and crude, but solid. The signal fire still burned, smoke marking the place that had been their whole world. Goodbye, she whispered, though the rotor noise swallowed the word. The flight to the rescue ship took 20 minutes. They were taken immediately to the medical bay, where a team of doctors and nurses descended on them with practiced efficiency. Victoria was separated from Ryan and Michelle, taken to a private examination room where they cut away her ruined designer suit and began assessing the damage. The dislocated shoulder was worse than she'd thought. The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes named Dr. Patterson, explained that it had partially healed in the wrong position. They'd have to redislocate it to set it properly, and the process was going to hurt badly, even with pain medication. We can put you under, he offered. General anesthesia. You won't feel anything. Victoria thought about the past 2 months, about coconuts and storms and learning to start fires, about pain she'd pushed through because there was no alternative. No, I want to be awake. Just tell me when. Dr. Patterson looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, on 3. He counted. On 3, he manipulated her shoulder with practiced force, and Victoria heard herself scream. The pain was white-hot, total, worse than anything on the island had been. Then it was over, and the relief was almost as overwhelming as the pain had been. There, Dr. Patterson said, gently rotating her arm. That's better. We'll keep it immobilized for a few weeks, but you should regain full mobility eventually. The rest of the examination revealed cracked ribs that had mostly healed on their own, severe dehydration, malnutrition, various cuts and infections that needed antibiotics, and what Dr. Patterson called general trauma consistent with prolonged survival conditions. He was kind about it, but Victoria could read the concern in his face. You're lucky to be alive, he said finally. All 3 of you. 2 months on that island. Most people wouldn't have made it 2 weeks. We had help, Victoria said, thinking of Thomas Chen's journal. And we had each other. She was cleaned up, given proper clothes, soft scrubs that felt like luxury against her skin, and moved to a recovery room. An IV drip fed fluids and nutrients into her arm. Someone brought her real food, soup, bread, fruit, and she ate slowly, her stomach having forgotten how to handle anything substantial. A knock on the door interrupted her 3rd piece of bread. A woman entered, professional in a Navy suit, her expression carefully neutral. Miss Hale, I'm Lieutenant Commander Phillips. I'm coordinating the investigation into Flight 247. I need to ask you some questions when you're feeling up to it. Now is fine. Victoria set down the bread. What do you need to know? Phillips pulled out a tablet and stylus. Start from the beginning. What do you remember about the crash? Victoria told her everything. The turbulence, the way the cabin had torn apart, waking up on the beach. She described the other bodies they'd found, gave descriptions as best she could remember. She explained how they'd survived, the shelter, the food sources, the tools they'd found from a previous survivor. This previous survivor, Phillips said, her stylus pausing. You said you found a journal? Yes. From 1987. A fisherman named Thomas Chen. He was rescued after 7 months. Phillips made a note. We'll want to see that journal. It might help us understand the island's location relative to known shipping lanes. She looked up. Ms. Hale, I need to inform you that the search for Flight 247 survivors was officially called off 3 weeks ago. You were all declared dead. The words hit harder than Victoria expected. dead. The black box was never recovered. Without it, and without any sign of survivors after 6 weeks of intensive searching, the decision was made to end active rescue operations. Phillips's expression softened slightly. Your survival is nothing short of miraculous. The media is going to be intense when this gets out. When will that be? We're holding the information for 24 hours to give you time to contact your families privately first. After that, it's going to be everywhere. She paused. Ms. Hale, you should also know that your company has been in the news extensively. There's been... She stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. Perhaps it's better if your team briefs you directly. Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. What happened? That's not my place to discuss. But you should prepare yourself. 2 months is a long time in the business world. Phillips stood. I'll let you rest. We can continue the interview tomorrow if you're not feeling up to more questions. After she left, Victoria sat in the quiet recovery room and tried to process it all. Declared dead. The search called off, the company in the news. What had happened while she was gone? Had Marcus taken over as CEO? Had the board restructured everything? Had her absence mattered at all? Or had the empire she'd built simply continued without her? Her spiraling thoughts were interrupted by another knock. Ryan appeared in the doorway, cleaned up and wearing scrubs similar to hers, his arm in a proper sling now. They told me you were awake, he said. Can I come in? Please. He sat in the chair beside her bed, and for a moment they just looked at each other. They looked so different like this, clean, medicated, properly dressed, but also fundamentally changed in ways that had nothing to do with appearance. I talked to Emma, Ryan said quietly, and his voice broke on her name. She's with her grandmother at the hospital. They're flying her out here tomorrow. He had to stop, had to compose himself. She didn't believe it at first, thought it was a cruel joke. Her grandmother had to convince her it was really me on the phone. Victoria reached out and took his hand. You'll see her tomorrow. Yeah. He wiped his eyes roughly. I keep thinking about what I'm going to say to her. How do you explain 2 months? How do you make a 6-year-old understand why you disappeared? You tell her the truth, that you survived because you had to get back to her, that she was the reason you kept going. He nodded slowly. The doctors say I'll make a full recovery, physically anyway. They're less certain about, he tapped his temple, the psychological stuff. They want me to talk to someone, a therapist who specializes in trauma. Are you going to? Yeah, I think I need to. He looked at her directly. What about you? What happens when you go back to your empire? Victoria had been avoiding that question, but sitting here with Ryan, there was no point in pretending. I don't know. They told me the company's been in the news. Something happened while I was gone. And honestly, she took a breath. I'm not sure I want to go back to who I was before. What do you want? I want to build something different, something that matters the way Emma matters to you, or Michelle's wedding matters to her. I spent 15 years building a company that could replace me in 3 weeks. That's not legacy. That's just ego. Ryan squeezed her hand. Whatever you decide, you know I'm here, right? We didn't survive that island just to go back to being strangers. No, Victoria agreed. We didn't. They sat together in comfortable silence until a nurse came to check Victoria's vitals and shooed Ryan back to his own recovery room. Alone again, Victoria closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept churning through possibilities and worries and the strange grief of surviving when so many others hadn't. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to darkness and the sound of someone crying. For a moment, she was back in the shelter listening to Michelle's nightmares, but then reality reasserted itself. She was on a ship, in a bed, safe. The crying was coming from somewhere down the hall. Victoria got up carefully, her shoulder throbbing in protest, and followed the sound to Michelle's room. The flight attendant was sitting up in bed, her broken arm properly casted now, tears streaming down her face as she stared at a phone screen. Michelle? Victoria entered quietly. What's wrong? Michelle looked up, her expression devastated. They postponed the wedding. My fiancé, he thought I was dead, so he postponed it indefinitely. And I know it makes sense. I know he couldn't plan a wedding while mourning, but I missed it. We were supposed to get married 2 weeks ago, and I missed it because I was dead. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed. You didn't miss it. It didn't happen. There's a difference. Is there? Michelle's voice was raw.
I keep thinking about all the things that happened without me. My sister had a baby, my best friend from college got divorced. The world kept going and I wasn't in it, and now I'm back, but everything's different. Everything's different for all of us, Victoria said gently. Ryan's daughter grew up 2 months without him. My company probably moved on. We can't get those 2 months back. But we're alive, Michelle. We get to have futures. That's more than a lot of people got.
Michelle nodded, wiping her eyes.
I know I should be grateful. I am grateful. But I'm also just, she gestured helplessly. I don't know what to do with all these feelings. Neither do I, Victoria admitted. But we'll figure it out. Same way we figured out how to survive. They talked for another hour, sharing fears and hopes and the strange displacement of returning to a world that had already mourned them.
Eventually, Michelle's medication kicked in and she grew drowsy, and Victoria returned to her own room feeling slightly less alone in her uncertainty. The next day brought more interviews, more medical tests, and finally, visitors. Victoria's CFO Marcus arrived first, impeccably dressed as always, his expression unreadable. He stood in the doorway of her recovery room, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to enter. Marcus? Victoria sat up straighter, wincing as her ribs protested. Come in. He did, moving carefully, like approaching something fragile. Victoria, everyone thought, he stopped, composing himself. I'm very glad you're alive. Thank you. Now tell me what happened to the company. Marcus's jaw tightened. The board declared you dead after 4 weeks. I was named interim CEO. We had to make decisions quickly. Investors were panicking. Competitors were circling. 3 major deals were in jeopardy. And? Victoria kept her voice level. I held things together. Made some restructuring decisions you might not have made. Changed some operational procedures. We lost 2 board members who disagreed with my direction, but we gained stability. He met her eyes. I did what I thought you would have done, but not what I actually would have done. No, he admitted. Not exactly. I'm not you, Victoria. Nobody is. The company survived without you, but it wasn't the same company. Victoria absorbed that. Part of her wanted to be angry, wanted to fight to reclaim what was hers. But a larger part, the part that had learned to start fires and catch fish and accept help, recognized something else. You did well, she said finally. Thank you for keeping it alive. Marcus blinked. You're not angry? I'm too tired to be angry, and I've learned some things about what actually matters. She gestured to the chair. Sit. We need to talk about what happens next. They spent the next hour discussing the company's status, the changes Marcus had implemented, the deals he'd made. Some of it Victoria agreed with. Some she didn't. But through it all, she found herself less emotionally invested than she'd expected. The company had been her life, her identity, her everything. Now it was just a business. Important, yes. Worth fighting for, certainly, but not worth dying for, not worth losing herself for. I'm going to come back, she said finally, but not the same way. I want to restructure my role, take on a different position. Chairman maybe, rather than CEO. Let you keep running operations. Marcus looked stunned. You're serious? Completely. You've proven you can do the job, and I've proven that maybe I shouldn't have been doing it alone in the first place. She smiled slightly. Consider it a promotion. Victoria, I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep making the company better. Say you'll remember that businesses are made of people, not just profit margins. Say you'll do better than I did. Marcus nodded slowly. I can do that. After he left, Victoria felt lighter than she had in years. Letting go of absolute control hadn't killed her. In fact, it felt like the first truly smart business decision she'd made in a decade. Down the hall, she heard commotion, excited voices, someone crying happy tears. She got up and walked toward the sound, finding a small crowd gathered outside Ryan's room. Through the doorway, she could see him kneeling on the floor, holding a little girl with dark hair and the biggest smile Victoria had ever seen. Emma. She was real, and she was here, and she was clinging to her father like she'd never let go. Victoria watched from the hallway, not wanting to intrude on their reunion, but unable to look away. Ryan was crying openly, saying Emma's name over and over, and the little girl was talking rapidly about everything she'd missed. School, her friends, her birthday bike, the stupid news people who kept asking questions. "I knew you were alive," Emma said fiercely. "Everyone said you were gone, but I knew. I told Grandma you were just lost and you'd find your way home." "I'm here," Ryan managed. "I'm here, baby. I'm so sorry I was gone. I'm so sorry." "It's okay, Daddy. You're home now." Victoria turned away, giving them privacy, and nearly ran into Michelle. The flight attendant had her own visitor, a tall man with red eyes who was holding her good hand like it was the most precious thing in the world. "That's her fiancé," a nurse said quietly, seeing Victoria's curiosity. "He got here an hour ago. They haven't stopped crying since." Everywhere Victoria looked, there were reunions, people being welcomed back to lives they'd thought were over. She returned to her room feeling oddly hollow. No one was coming for her, no family rushing to her bedside, no loved ones crying with relief. She'd survived 2 months on an island, had been declared dead and then miraculously found, and the only person who'd come to see her was her CFO with business updates. She sat on the edge of the bed and forced herself to face the truth. This was the life she'd built. Successful, powerful, and utterly alone. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Ryan appeared in the doorway, Emma holding his hand. "Hey," he said gently. "Someone wants to meet you." Emma looked up at Victoria with solemn, dark eyes. "Are you the lady who helped my daddy survive?" Victoria's throat tightened. "We helped each other. He told me you were brave and smart, and that you learned how to make fire." Emma said this last part with clear admiration. "That's really cool." "Thank you," Victoria managed to smile. "Your dad talked about you every single day. You're the reason he never gave up." Emma thought about this seriously. Then she let go of Ryan's hand, walked over to Victoria, and hugged her. It was unexpected and fierce, and Victoria found herself hugging back, this small human she'd never met but who felt somehow essential. "Thank you for keeping my daddy safe," Emma whispered. "Thank you for giving him a reason to stay alive," Victoria whispered back. When Emma pulled away, Ryan was watching them with an expression Victoria couldn't quite read. "We're having a celebration dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just here in the medical bay. Michelle and her fiancé, me and Emma, some of the rescue crew who found us. We'd like you to be there." "I don't want to intrude on family time." "You're not intruding." Ryan's voice was firm. "You're family now. Whether you like it or not, you're stuck with us." Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. "Okay," she said. "I'd like that." That evening, they gathered in the medical bay's common area, survivors and loved ones and the rescue team who'd brought them home. The food was simple, the setting clinical, but the feeling was something Victoria had never experienced in all her high-powered business dinners and corporate galas. This was real. This was people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side changed. Michelle's fiancé made a toast. "To survival," he said, raising his plastic cup. "And to second chances. And to the 3 bravest people I've ever heard of." They drank and talked and shared stories. Emma told everyone about her birthday bike. Michelle's fiancé explained how he'd spent the past 2 months trying to honor her memory by being kind to strangers. Ryan showed off the photo that had survived the crash, now weathered and water-stained, but still showing Emma's gap-toothed smile. And Victoria talked about Thomas Chen, the fisherman whose journal had helped them survive, whose 7 months alone had paved the way for their 2 months together. They drank to him too, to a man they'd never met but who'd saved their lives across decades. "What happens now?" Emma asked as the evening wound down. "Do you all go back to normal?" The 3 survivors looked at each other. After everything they'd been through, after all the ways they'd changed, normal seemed impossible. But maybe that was the point. "We go forward," Victoria said. "Not back. Forward to something new." Ryan nodded. "Together." Michelle raised her cup one more time. "To going forward. To new beginnings. To remembering what matters." They drank together, and as Victoria looked around at these people who'd become her family in the worst circumstances imaginable, she finally understood something her mother had tried to teach her years ago. Dignity wasn't in being visible or powerful. It was in being connected, in mattering to people and letting people matter to you. She'd built an empire, but here, in a medical bay on a rescue ship, surrounded by survivors and second chances, she'd found something better. She'd found home. The media storm hit exactly as Lieutenant Commander Phillips had warned, but somehow worse. Victoria watched from her hotel room 3 days later as her face appeared on every news channel, the headline variations all saying the same thing: Tech CEO returns from the dead. They'd found the worst photo of her too, the one taken immediately after rescue, gaunt and hollow-eyed, looking more like a ghost than a person. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since they'd turned it back on. Reporters, investors, old business contacts, people she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly desperate to reconnect. She'd turned it off after the first hour and hadn't turned it back on since. Ryan texted instead. They'd exchanged numbers before leaving the ship, along with Michelle, creating a group chat they'd named Island Survivors, because none of them could think of anything better. Ryan's message was simple. "You okay?" Victoria typed back. "Hiding in a hotel? You." Emma won't let me out of her sight. I went to the bathroom and she stood outside the door talking to me the whole time. Despite everything, Victoria smiled. "That sounds perfect." "It is. Overwhelming, but perfect. How are you handling the media?" "Not answering calls. Probably should deal with it eventually." "Eventually can wait. Take care of yourself first." Michelle chimed in then. "Just finished another interview. They keep asking if I'm going to sue the airline. Like that's what I'm thinking about right now." "What are you thinking about?" Victoria typed. "Wedding planning. For real this time. We pushed it to next spring, something small, just family and friends. You're both invited, by the way. Non-negotiable." Victoria stared at the message for a long moment. She'd never been invited to a wedding by someone who actually wanted her there, not as a business connection or social obligation. This felt different, real. "I'll be there," she typed. "Me too," Ryan added. "Emma's already asking if she can be a flower girl." "Tell Emma yes," Michelle responded. "Absolutely yes." Victoria set her phone down and looked around the hotel suite. It was expensive, luxurious, everything the island hadn't been. Soft bed, climate control, room service menu with 24 options. But somehow it felt emptier than their palm frond shelter ever had. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She checked the peephole and saw Marcus standing in the hallway, holding a briefcase and looking uncomfortable. "I know you said you needed space," he said when she opened the door. "But there's something you need to see. It can't wait." Victoria let him in. He set his briefcase on the desk and pulled out a tablet, his expression serious. "The board met yesterday," he began, "without you. There's a faction that wants to keep me as CEO permanently. They're arguing that the company stabilized under my leadership, that your survival doesn't change the fundamental question of succession planning." "Let me guess," Victoria said. "Gerald Thornton is leading this faction." Marcus nodded. Gerald had been on the board for 6 years, constantly pushing for more aggressive expansion, more risk-taking, more everything that made Victoria's approach seem cautious by comparison. He'd been a thorn in her side since day one. He's calling for a vote next week. Either you come back and prove you're still capable of running the company, or they formalize my position and push you to chairman emeritus. Marcus met her eyes, which is basically a fancy way of saying they want you gone. Victoria should have been furious, should have been planning her counterattack, marshaling her allies, preparing to destroy Gerald Thornton's challenge the way she'd destroyed every other threat to her position. But instead, she just felt tired. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked. "Really want. Not what's expected or strategic. What do you actually want?" He looked surprised by the question. "I want to run the company." "I'm good at it, Victoria. I know you didn't plan for this, but these past 2 months showed me that I can do this job, that I should be doing it." "You're right," she said simply. What? "You're right. You should be CEO. You've earned it." Victoria sat down on the edge of the bed. "I'm going to support your permanent appointment. I'll take chairman, but actually chairman, not emeritus. I want a seat at the table, but I don't want to run the daily operations anymore." Marcus set down the tablet slowly. "Victoria, do you understand what you're saying? You built this company. It's your legacy." "No, it's a company. My legacy is what I do with the rest of my life." She thought about Ryan and Emma, about Michelle's wedding invitation, about the way her mother had found dignity in invisible work. I've been doing this wrong for 15 years. Time to try something different. The board won't like it. Gerald certainly won't. Gerald's never liked anything I've done. That won't change. Victoria stood. But here's what's going to happen. I'm going to that board meeting. I'm going to tell them exactly what I just told you. And I'm going to make it very clear that if they try to push me out completely, I'll fight them with everything I have. But if they accept the transition plan, you as CEO, me as chairman, then I'll make it smooth. Their choice. Marcus studied her for a long moment. You really have changed. The island changes people, either breaks them or rebuilds them. She smiled slightly. I got lucky. I had good people to rebuild with. After Marcus left, Victoria opened her laptop for the first time since the rescue. Her inbox had over 3,000 unread emails. She ignored them all and opened a blank document instead. She wrote for 2 hours, barely stopping, putting into words everything she'd learned and felt and become over the past 2 months. When she finished, she had the outline for a new initiative, a foundation focused on supporting survivors of trauma. Not just plane crashes, but any kind of catastrophic loss. People who'd had their lives torn apart and needed help putting the pieces back together in new configurations. It would need funding, staff, real infrastructure, but she had the resources to make it happen, and for the first time in years, she had the motivation. She sent the document to Marcus with a simple note. New project. Let's discuss after the board meeting. His response came back within minutes. This is brilliant. Let's make it happen. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Victoria met with lawyers, reviewed company documents, had uncomfortable conversations with board members who wanted her to fight harder for her old position. She did interviews with major news outlets, carefully controlling the narrative, focusing on survival and recovery rather than corporate drama. Ryan had his own media circuit, though he handled it differently. Every interview he gave, he talked about Emma, about single parenthood, about the invisible workers who kept society functioning. He turned down a book deal and 3 movie offers, saying his story wasn't for sale. Michelle went back to work, which surprised everyone. The airline offered her a generous settlement and retirement package, but she turned it down. I'm not ready to stop flying, she told Victoria over coffee. The crash doesn't get to take that from me. I'm getting back up there as soon as the doctors clear me. That's brave, Victoria said. No, it's necessary. If I don't face it now, I never will. Michelle stirred her coffee absently. Besides, I understand now why that work matters. Every flight attendant is potentially the difference between someone living or dying. I took it for granted before. I won't anymore. They met for coffee every few days, the 3 of them, sometimes with Emma or Michelle's fiancé David. They talked about therapy. All 3 were seeing counselors, working through the trauma in different ways. They talked about nightmares and triggers, and the weird guilt of surviving when 237 other people hadn't. I keep thinking about the other passengers, Ryan said one afternoon. Wondering if we could have saved more people if we'd looked harder, searched better. We searched for days, Victoria reminded him gently. We found everyone who'd made it to shore. I know, but knowing doesn't stop the wondering. He looked down at his coffee. Emma's therapist says it's normal. Survivor's guilt. She says it might never fully go away. I just have to learn to carry it. That's what Dr. Patterson told me too, Michelle said. That trauma isn't something you get over. It's something you integrate. You find ways to live with it, to make meaning from it, but it doesn't disappear. Victoria thought about that, about integration and meaning and carrying weight. Maybe that's okay, she said slowly. Maybe we're not supposed to forget or move on completely. Maybe remembering, holding on to it, maybe that's how we honor the people who didn't make it. Ryan nodded. Thomas Chen wrote something about that in his journal, near the end when he knew rescue was coming. He said the island taught him that survival isn't about forgetting the hard parts. It's about letting them change you into something stronger. The board meeting arrived on a Thursday morning, scheduled for 9 a.m. in the same conference room where Victoria had made countless high-stakes decisions. She arrived early, dressed in a new suit that fit her thinner frame, her shoulders still in a supportive brace but healing well. Gerald Thornton was already there, along with 3 other board members who'd aligned with his faction. They looked surprised to see her, which told Victoria everything she needed to know about their expectations. Victoria, Gerald said, standing. "We weren't sure you'd come." "Why wouldn't I? It's my company." She took her usual seat at the head of the table. Or it was. "We'll see what it is after today." The rest of the board filed in over the next 10 minutes. When everyone was settled, Victoria stood. "I'm going to make this simple," she began. 2 months ago, I got on a plane thinking I was irreplaceable, that this company couldn't function without me at the helm every single day, making every single decision. Then I spent 8 weeks on an island learning that literally everything I believed about leadership was wrong. She had their attention now. Even Gerald looked intrigued rather than hostile. I didn't survive that island alone. I survived because Ryan Mercer, a maintenance contractor I'd never bothered to learn the name of, taught me how to start fires and find water and build shelter. I survived because Michelle Carson, a flight attendant I'd treated like furniture, knew how to catch fish and stay calm in a crisis. I survived because we worked together, because we each brought different strengths, because we understood that none of us could make it solo. Victoria pulled up a presentation on the screen behind her. This company survived my absence because Marcus Chen stepped up and led brilliantly. Not the way I would have led, better in some ways, differently in others, but effectively. He kept us stable, kept us moving forward, and he did it without trying to be me. She clicked to the next slide. So here's my proposal. Marcus becomes CEO, permanent and official. I become chairman of the board, maintaining strategic oversight, but stepping back from daily operations. We restructure executive compensation to reward collaboration and long-term thinking rather than individual heroics. And we launch a new corporate foundation focused on trauma recovery and survivor support. Gerald cleared his throat. "Victoria, with all due respect, this sounds like you're running away. Like the island broke you and now you can't handle the pressure of real leadership." "No," Victoria said calmly. "The island rebuilt me. It taught me that real leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room or making every decision yourself. It's about knowing when to step back, when to let other people shine, when to build something bigger than your own ego." She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. "I'm not running away. I'm running towards something better. A company that doesn't depend on any single person. A leadership structure that encourages growth and succession rather than hoarding power. And yes, a foundation that takes some of our considerable resources and uses them to help people who are going through the worst moments of their lives." "And if we vote no?" Gerald asked. "If we decide we want you back as CEO or not at all?" Victoria smiled. "Then I'll fight you. I'll use every share I control, every relationship I've built, every bit of influence I have to make your lives difficult. But I don't think you'll vote no. Because what I'm proposing is good for the company, good for shareholders, and good for our long-term stability. The only thing it's bad for is the ego of people who think leadership means domination." The vote took 20 minutes of discussion. When they finally called it, the result was 11-3 in favor of Victoria's proposal. Gerald Thornton was one of the 3 dissenting votes, but even he looked more thoughtful than angry when it was done. "This is going to take some getting used to," he admitted, "but I suppose change is inevitable, even when it's uncomfortable." "Especially when it's uncomfortable," Victoria corrected. "That's when you know it's real." After the meeting, she found Marcus waiting in her office. His office now, she supposed, though the transition would take time. "You did it," he said, looking slightly dazed. "You actually gave it up voluntarily." "I didn't give it up. I transformed it into something better." Victoria sat down in one of the chairs she'd previously reserved for visitors, leaving the CEO's chair for Marcus. "Besides, I have more important things to focus on now." She spent the next 3 weeks working on the foundation, pouring into it all the energy she'd once devoted to quarterly earnings and market share. She hired staff, established protocols, began reaching out to trauma counselors and survivor groups. She named it the Thomas Chen Foundation, in honor of the fishermen whose journal had saved their lives. Ryan helped with the planning, contributing his perspective as a survivor and his practical knowledge of what kind of support actually helped versus what just sounded good. He'd taken a leave of absence from his maintenance job, using the time to be with Emma and figure out what came next for both of them. "I got a job offer," he told Victoria during one of their planning sessions. "From Hale Industries, actually. Director of Facilities Management. Marcus said you recommended me." "I did. You're good at fixing things, Ryan, and you understand how the invisible infrastructure of a company actually works because you've been part of it. She smiled. But you don't have to take it if you don't want to. No pressure. I want to. The pay it's more than I've ever made. Enough to get Emma into a better school, move to a safer neighborhood. Enough to stop constantly worrying about money. He paused. It feels like too much. Like I didn't earn it. You survived 2 months on an island. You kept us all alive. You earned it and more. Victoria met his eyes. Besides, this isn't charity. You're genuinely the best person for the job. I don't give positions away, Ryan. I give them to people who deserve them. He laughed. The old Victoria would never have admitted that someone from maintenance could be director of anything. The old Victoria was an idiot, she said bluntly. The new one is trying to be smarter. Michelle's wedding came in April, 6 months after the crash. It was held in a small garden venue outside Portland, intimate and beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with meaning. Victoria arrived with Ryan and Emma, the three of them drawing curious stares from other guests who recognized them from the news. Michelle looked radiant in a simple white dress, her arm fully healed now, her smile genuine and bright. When she saw them arrive, she broke away from the photographer and ran over, hugging each of them fiercely. You came, she said, even though they'd RSVP'd yes months ago. Of course we came, Victoria said. We're family, remember? Yeah. Michelle's eyes filled with happy tears. We are. The ceremony was short and sweet, the vows personal and funny and occasionally tearful. When David promised to love Michelle even when she woke up screaming from nightmares, when Michelle promised to choose him every day the way she'd chosen survival on the island, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. At the reception, Emma convinced Ryan to dance with her, her pink dress twirling as he spun her around the floor. Victoria watched from a table, nursing champagne, and feeling content in a way she'd never experienced at any of the high society galas she'd attended over the years. You look different, someone said behind her. She turned to find Michelle's fiancé, husband now, standing there with 2 plates of cake. Different how? Victoria asked. Happier. More real. David handed her one of the plates. Michelle told me you used to be pretty intense, all business, all the time. But you seem, I don't know, human now. Victoria laughed. That's the nicest way anyone's ever told me I was an emotionless robot before. I didn't mean it like that. No, you're right. I was. The island fixed that. She took a bite of cake. Or broke it, depending on your perspective. I think it fixed it, David said seriously. Michelle's different too. She doesn't sweat the small stuff anymore. Doesn't get anxious about things that don't matter. The crash and the island, they were horrible. But they also gave me back a version of her that's more fully herself, if that makes sense. It did make sense. Victoria had seen the same transformation in Ryan, in herself. The island had stripped away all the pretense, all the performance, all the ways they'd been performing their lives rather than living them. What was left was rawer, but more honest. Later in the evening, as the party wound down, the 3 survivors found themselves alone at a table on the garden's edge. Emma had fallen asleep on Ryan's lap, her princess crown tilted sideways. Michelle's shoes were off, her feet probably killing her. Victoria's shoulder ached from the dancing she'd allowed Emma to talk her into. I can't believe it's been 6 months, Michelle said quietly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime. Both, Ryan said. It's both. Do you ever wish you could go back? Victoria asked. Not to the crash, but to before. To not knowing what you're capable of surviving. They were quiet, thinking about it. No, Michelle said finally. I was sleepwalking through my life before. Going through motions, checking boxes, not really present for any of it. Now I'm awake. It's harder sometimes, more intense, but it's real. I miss the innocence, Ryan admitted. The version of me that didn't know how fragile everything is. But I wouldn't trade what I learned. Emma's first day back at school, I walked her to the door, and she turned around and said, I love you, Daddy, like it was the most important thing in the world. Before the island, I would have just said, love you too, and walked away. Now I knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and told her exactly how much she means to me. He adjusted her crown gently. I don't miss being the version of me that took those moments for granted. Victoria thought about the penthouse she'd sold, The corner office she'd given up, the identity she'd shed like old skin. I don't miss who I was. That woman was successful but small. She'd built an empire but had no kingdom worth ruling. Now I have less power but more purpose. I'll take that trade. They sat together as the stars came out. Three people who'd been strangers 8 months ago and were now bound by something deeper than friendship. They'd seen each other at their worst and best. They'd survived together. They'd learned together. They'd become family in the truest sense, not because of blood or obligation, but because they'd chosen each other when choice was all they had. To survival, Michelle said, raising her water glass. To second chances, Ryan added. To finding what actually matters, Victoria finished. They drank together, and in that moment, Victoria understood with perfect clarity that the island hadn't taken anything from her. It had given her everything she'd been missing: connection, purpose, the understanding that strength wasn't about standing alone, but about knowing when to reach for help and who to reach for. The foundation launched officially in June with a gala that Victoria insisted on keeping modest. She gave a speech about survival and recovery, about Thomas Chen and the journal that had saved them, about the invisible people who kept the world running and deserved recognition and support. Ryan spoke too, briefly, about single parenthood and financial stress and how trauma compounds when you're already struggling. He announced a new Hale Industries initiative providing extended support for employees facing personal crises, something he'd pushed Marcus to implement and that the board had approved unanimously. Michelle couldn't attend. She was working a flight to Tokyo, but she sent a video message that played on the screens. "I'm up here at 30,000 feet, she said, her smile bright against the plane window behind her. "Doing the work I love because I refuse to let fear win. That's what recovery looks like. That's what surviving means. Not avoiding the things that hurt us, but facing them and doing them anyway, transformed but not destroyed." The Foundation's first year exceeded every goal Victoria had set. They helped over 300 families, providing counseling, financial support, and practical resources for people recovering from accidents, disasters, and traumatic loss. Victoria met with many of them personally, and each conversation reminded her why this work mattered more than quarterly earnings ever had. Emma's 7th birthday party, the one Ryan had missed while stranded, got a do-over that summer. They held it in Victoria's new apartment, smaller than the penthouse, but warmer, filled with Emma's friends and their parents and the found family of island survivors. The bike Ryan had saved for was there, pink with streamers and a basket, and Emma rode it in circles around the living room until Victoria worried about her furniture, and Ryan finally made her stop. "This is what I wanted her to have," Ryan said, watching Emma show the bike to Michelle. "Not just the bike, but this. Community. People who show up. Adults who care about her beyond just me." "She has that now," Victoria said. "We all do." As the party wound down and Emma crashed on the couch, exhausted and happy, Victoria found herself on the balcony with Ryan, looking out at the city lights. "Do you ever think about the island?" he asked. "Every day," she admitted. "Not the fear or the hunger, but what we built there. How we became better versions of ourselves because we had to." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "I used to think success meant never needing help, being completely self-sufficient. The island taught me that's not success, that's just loneliness with good marketing." Victoria laughed. "I should put that on a motivational poster." "Please don't. Emma already thinks I'm embarrassing enough without adding poster quotes." He smiled. "But seriously, thank you for everything you've done. The job, the foundation, being part of Emma's life. You didn't have to do any of it." "Yes, I did. Your family, Ryan, both of you. That means showing up." He put his arm around her shoulders, careful of the one that still ached sometimes when the weather changed. "We made it. Against every odd, we actually made it." "We did," Victoria agreed. And standing there, looking out at a city she'd once conquered through force of will alone, surrounded by people she'd chosen and who'd chosen her back, she finally understood what her mother had tried to teach her all those years ago. Success wasn't about being seen or powerful or untouchable. Success was about being connected, about building something that mattered beyond yourself, about knowing that when things fell apart, and they always eventually did, you had people who would help you rebuild. The island had torn Victoria Hale down to nothing, But nothing, it turned out, was the perfect place to start building something real. She'd survived. They'd all survived. And now, finally, they were learning how to live. Years later, when reporters asked Victoria Hale about the crash and the island and the 2 months that changed everything, she always gave the same answer. I died in that crash. The person I was, the life I'd built, all of it ended when we hit the water. But something better survived. 3 people who learned that the only way through impossible circumstances is together. And that lesson, that's what saved us, not just on the island, but every day since. She never mentioned the wealth she'd given up or the power she'd relinquished. She never talked about the corner office or the empire or the Victoria Hale who'd walked past invisible people without seeing them. That woman was gone, left behind on an island in the Pacific along with designer suits and the delusion of self-sufficiency. What remained was simpler, more honest, more human. A woman who knew how to start fires and catch fish and build shelter, both literal and metaphorical. A woman who showed up for the people she loved and let them show up for her. A woman who understood that true strength wasn't about standing alone, but about knowing who to stand with. The island had been hell, but it had also been the best thing that ever happened to her, because it taught her what actually mattered. And once you knew that, once you really understood it in your bones and blood and survival instinct, you could never go back to pretending otherwise. Emma grew up knowing her father's coworkers by name. Michelle flew for another 15 years before retiring to teach trauma counseling. Ryan became a vice president, then an executive, never forgetting where he'd started or who'd helped him survive. And Victoria built a foundation that helped thousands of people put their lives back together after impossible circumstances tore them apart. They stayed close, the 3 survivors. Holidays together, Sunday dinners, Emma's graduations, and Michelle's anniversary parties and Ryan's promotion celebrations. They were each other's emergency contacts, each other's first phone calls, each other's family in every way that mattered. Because you didn't survive 2 months on an island with someone and then drift apart. You didn't learn to depend on people and then forget how. You didn't discover what real connection felt like and then settle for anything less. The island had changed them, broken them down and rebuilt them into something stronger, something better, something more whole. And every day since, they chose to honor that transformation by showing up for each other and for everyone else who needed someone to help them survive the impossible. That was legacy. That was purpose. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.